ask yourself if you see yourself doing it in the next 5 years. And if the answer is no, I don't, well, why are you doing it?
Hey Ben, thanks for joining me today. Just before we kind of get going, do you want to let us know where you're at in the world right now, where you're originally from?
Yeah, so I grew up in Sydney, Australia, and unfortunately for myself right now, myself and my partner, so my partner Gio, she's from France. I'm obviously from Sydney, and she actually can't come back to Australia right now. So we met about 2 years ago. So we're kind of vagabonding around the world right now, which is an interesting thing to do because it's tricky, right? Obviously, some places are open, some places are not. We're in the middle of COVID. As at today, it's 2nd of February, 2021. So we're in Mexico right now. We're in a spot called Porto Escondido, which is a really nice little beach town. So definitely worse places to be, but it's a little bit funny, to be honest, because it's like limbo. We're here and everyone's like, what are you going to do next? Where are you going? And we're like, well, we don't really know because make a plan. 2 weeks later, the plan is gone. So I've just stopped making plans and I'm kind of in a surrendered state here in Mexico, just waiting to see what happens.
It's kind of funny you say that because like you can't necessarily get back into Australia, and I'm based in the UK, and I'm trying pretty hard to leave the UK at the moment. It's almost like the opposite, but yeah, hopefully be out this week, depending on flights being cancelled, but we'll see. Awesome. All right. So I guess to
Nice.
kind of start, do you want to maybe sum up a bit about to focus on your business journey? Like where did it sort of start to where you're at at the moment?
Sure. Yeah, look, I was really blessed when I was about 20, 21 years old. And to kind of take this back into my origins, I had an interesting early teenage years. From the age of about 16 to about 20, I was heavily abusing drugs. So started with smoking a lot of weed, and that sort of progressed into party drugs. And yeah, I went pretty hard into that. I've always had a mindset of I'll kind of push things a bit too hard, I would say. That's probably one of my, my drawbacks. And I started to experience this like growing social anxiety that sort of just like snowballed. And I had these very severe, what you could call episodes, which I later found out were psychotic episodes, where I was fully hallucinating and having conversations with people that weren't there. And it was very, very painful experience for me. I had about 20 or 30 of these episodes. And looking back on it today, they were very formative, but very, very painful. It's almost like it's almost like ripping the mask off your face and sort of like, losing your identity in a big way. So I wasn't in a good spot. I was very, very depressed. My health was very poor. I had no money. I was probably hanging out with the wrong people socially. I was disconnected from my family. I was obviously kind of destroying my life. I got arrested 4 times in the space of 1 year when I was 18 years old. And if I kind of forecast that out, I didn't really see it going very well. One of the stupidest things I'd ever done was I walked through a drug and narcotics check from the Thai Lao border across from Laos into Thailand with about half an ounce of marijuana in my bag by accident because I was so fucked up. And I walked through a drug and narcotics check, and I had my backpack on, and I walk into this room and I look up and I see 2 guys standing there with massive semi-automatic rifles and 2 sniffer dogs, and my heart has just dropped from right here all the way down, and it felt like my guts were kind of on the floor because I realized in that moment I've got drugs in my bag. So I did what I can sometimes do. I just put a face and I walk through. They check the person before me and they check the person after me, and I walk straight through that drug and narcotics check. Now, if I had gotten caught with that, I probably would have been killed in firing squad. And that's just one of the stupid things that I did during that time. So I was kind of on a path of destruction. I'm very lucky to be alive today, considering all the stupid shit I used to do. And I guess the turning point was, I was really struggling, and my brother was really, really there for me at that time. I had this ego that sort of told the world that I didn't care. I was very like gung ho and yeah, let's party and not care. But if I really look back on it, I think I had a lot of self-worth issues, and I was very scared and afraid. And I think that's kind of why I had a lot of trauma from my younger childhood years that I was repressing. And I think that was the expression of it. So yeah, my brother actually found a mentor, a guy that he worked with. His name was Lachlan Cameron. And my brother met him in a meeting. And it's funny, this guy just walked into the meeting And this is in a big corporation. It's like a big company, one of the biggest companies in Australia. And he's walked into this meeting and there's a bunch of people standing around. He just goes over to the whiteboard and he writes up on the whiteboard, what do people need that they don't know that they need? And he went around the room and he questioned every single person. And he said, what is the answer? And no one knew the answer. And he goes, okay. And he just walked out of the meeting and he left. And my brother was fascinated by this individual. He was fascinated by this person. He seemed to think a little bit differently. So my brother walked into the room with him one time and said, Lachlan, will you mentor me? And Lachlan smiled and he goes, yeah, well, funnily enough, I actually have a formal mentoring program. It's 12 weeks. I have these resources. Here is what it looks like. Bang, 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 bang. And my brother goes, oh, amazing. Can I start in 12 weeks? When I'm ready. And Lachlan goes, yeah, great. No, you start on Monday. So he's just thrown my brother into this thing. And, my brother and I, we were training a lot at the time. So we were like going to the gym for like, an hour or two every single day. So we would talk every day and he would kind of help me. And I was lucky enough, to then get mentored by Lachlan, after him. So I was like next in line sort of thing. And he actually went on to mentor my sister. And he also went on to mentor another really good friend of mine. So, here I am 20, 30 psychotic episodes deep, asking some pretty weird questions about the nature of the universe, feeling very alone, the bottom of the bottom, as you can imagine, just like not in a good spot. And within 3 weeks of talking to Lachlan, I had this completely expanded mind. I realized that all the things that were happening to me had benefit. I realized that I had the power to change these things. And ever since, I've never looked back. I was heavily medicated at that time. A few weeks after meeting Lachlan, I grabbed my medication, I threw it in the bin. I never took it again. About 6 months after meeting Lachlan, I was so inspired by the stuff that he taught me. I started a business with Drew, my brother. And that was the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey. And everything I do today is really an ode to this man. And he had no, he just wanted to do it. It was free, this mentoring. He was about 50 years old and he just wanted to help. And he changed my life. He literally on a dime, the direction that I was going was just suffering and, potentially death. And now, I've been able to help a shitload of people and I've been able to pass his message on to thousands and thousands of people. And that's, I guess, the motive driver of why I'm in business today.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I kind of know a little bit. I think some of that was new to me and I also know a little bit else. And I know, for example, just to kind of dig a bit deeper there, I know that you left uni or college right at the end of the journey. And I'm trying to understand a bit about how it pieced together. So, and just how it felt in general. So, because I look at it and it's something that I've not necessarily been through, is that there's areas where for me, I can be really, really hardworking. And then my switch off is I'll get blackout drunk, and I haven't for a while, but it's that there's not really much of a middle ground for me. Like if I drink to get very, very, very drunk. And there's been times, funny enough, where it's almost like wake up with blood and mud over me. And I'm like, what happened? And I guess throughout that, there's always kind of been functioning, and it's not to the same extent from my understanding, but probably different. But I'm trying to understand okay, how did that impact in terms of other people, and did other people notice? And you've gone through university to the final year. So were those episodes around the same time, and did other people notice, and what was the impact on other people throughout that?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, it was an interesting one. It was very interesting because, I was doing a finance degree. So, I went to a private school and my parents weren't wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. And in particular, when I was about 16, my parents went through, a lot of financial issues. So, just as that was kind of happening, these financial issues, they've actually moved me from a very small school to a really big private school. So they've essentially put all of their money into this education. And I did okay at school and I went through and I really felt like I owed something to my parents because they had given their heart and soul to make sure that I was educated, and I get into uni and I study finance because I'm like, well, this is the highest praise that I can do. I know I have a mathematic mind, so I'm going to commit to this. And I fucking hated it. I really just didn't like it. I didn't like the structure of it. I didn't like what was being taught. It never connected with me. I flunked out for the first couple of years. And eventually I kind of gripped my teeth and I was like, okay, I'm going to get through this. And it was the last year and I really started to perform. in the last year, and I had one subject left to go. So I'd finished everything, and I had one subject left to go. And in steps Lachlan Cameron. So Lachlan, he sat me down one day and he said, "Ben, tell me about what's going on. Tell me about where you're going in life and your goals and that sort of stuff." I told him about my goals, and he said to me, "Do you see yourself in finance in the next 5 years?" And I just felt it, and I just said, "No, no, I don't see myself in finance in the next 5 years." And he said, "Well, why the hell are you doing a finance degree?" I kind of sat back and I thought about it, and I couldn't find any good reason for why myself personally, based on my values and what I wanted in life and where I wanted to go, why I was doing it. So I made a decision after that phone call to quit my university degree. And it was just a line in the sand. I was like, no, I'm not finishing it. And look, it was really challenging because there was no one person on the planet except for Lachlan Cameron and he didn't even tell me to quit it. He just said, "Well, why are you doing it?" That's all he asked. He didn't ask anything else. He didn't say quit. He just said, "Why are you doing it?" I couldn't give him an answer. So I kind of dropped into the space a little bit and said, "You know what? I'm going to quit." And my family were very pissed off. All of my friends were like, "Dude, what are you doing? You're crazy." But I just had this inner knowing, this inner calling that if I just cut away and do what's right for me, that things are going to really work out. And, funnily enough, it was about 12 months later when I was running a business doing about 6 figures a year with my brother, and I, had a lot of the things that I want. I was able to look back and go, interesting. And my family and friends were finally able to sit down and go, interesting. And I guess that's one thing I want to mention for the audience. Like often business and entrepreneurship, you're not going to find many people that tell you it's a good idea unless it's people that have already done the thing that you want to do. And I guess this was a really lucky insight that I accidentally found, was that when it's talking about direction in life, what are you going to do? What are the next steps in your career? You're the only one that can really tune into what's right for you. And you've got to actually cut away from what your friends and family think, which is very challenging. And I think this is like the definition of a true entrepreneur. It's someone that has the courage to cut away and sit in the pocket of yourself and build internally, right? You have to become inspired from the inside, not motivated from the outside. So yeah, dropped out of my degree, and a lot of people, money down the drain. "Oh, it's so easy. Please just finish." My parents tried to bribe me to finish. "Ben, we're going to pay for you overseas flights. If we'll pay for this, we'll pay for that. Please go back and do it." And I made the decision to myself. I didn't want to have a fallback. I felt that it was my time to jump into entrepreneurship, and I didn't want to have this degree there as a fallback. I wanted no other option. I wanted to either fail miserably or I wanted to succeed. I only wanted those as the two options.
Really interesting, and there's a lot there. And I think I've got a few questions from that, but I think the one I want to ask is, when you handed in that paper, for me, I went through a similar thing, and it was a form that I signed, and I still have it. I had it on my whiteboard for a while, like blue tacked up. But for me, it was very mixed emotions. So I'm kind of curious, like when you handed in that form, when you made that call, like how did you feel? Because I know how I felt, and I want to know if it's a similar thing, or like, was it celebration or relief, or how was it?
Yeah, it was relief. It was power. It felt powerful to me because for the first time in my life, fucking backed myself hard, pushed all my chips in, and I backed myself. And funnily enough, that gave me self-worth. And what I realized was the reason that I didn't have self-worth in my life was because I wasn't being who I am. I was being someone else, and this is the reason I had all this psychosis and stuff, because I was disempowered as fuck. I was a very disempowered human being. And I realized I was disempowered because I put everyone else's opinions on pedestals and I put myself in the pit. And it wasn't until I don't want to say flip that script, but it wasn't until I put my own opinions and looked at my heart and said, like, okay, what do I really want here? That was the most powerful decision for me. And it was a momentum builder. And it was just like, okay, I backed myself, and it just felt powerful. And it felt really, really, really good to do that, funnily enough. And I was the only one that felt it. But, looking back, what is it, 8 years now, I can say I made the right decision.
It's awesome. And it's interesting because for me, there's a lot of that. Doesn't sound like it was as strong, but as well, there was almost like a bit of an emptiness. Like it was, for me, I don't know how to necessarily describe it, but I was kind of like, okay, I feel like I made the right choice, but also there's a bit of like this underlying emptiness, a bit of sadness. And it may have been because as well, like I was planning on going to South Carolina to study for a year. So it was like quite an exciting thing that was lined up. But for me, it was just like this path, and like, it was like, okay, just finish my second year and then go and do that. And then okay, well then you're on your last year, you might as well just go and finish that. And it's interesting because my dynamic was my similar thing with people that are like, oh, well, just finish your second year, you're almost there, and then see what you want to do. And I kind of knew like if I was going to do that, it would have been that kind of path if you just go on down that route, and it'll be like, okay, just get a job to see how it is kind of thing. So I get that totally. I guess I was lucky as well that my parents were pretty supportive when I made that decision. But I think I want to ask you in terms of, okay, say there's people in a similar situation, what advice would you give to them in terms of how do they decide whether what is right for them? She talks about that, like, okay, well, you look inside yourself and you've got that intrinsic area and you go, this is right for you. What advice would you give to other people to find that for them, that it's not just a momentary blip, perhaps along their degree, which maybe it might be. I don't know. I don't think entrepreneurship for me is right for everyone. So what advice would you give to people in that position?
My advice would be to extend out your time horizon. Very similar to what Lachlan Cameron did for me in that question. And it's a great question to ask yourself. If you are in that position, if you're in a job or if you're doing a university degree or anything where there's a bit of angst and you maybe feel like, is this the thing? Ask yourself if you see yourself doing it in the next 5 years, and sit down and close your eyes and just feel into the answer. And you'll probably get a pretty strong answer. And if the answer is no, I don't, my question would be from there, well, why are you doing it? Because I feel like, when we're young, the time and space horizon, it's very similar to what you just said there, Luke, like, oh, just finish the next subject, and then you'll figure out what you want to do. Just finish this next thing and then you'll figure it out. But the reality is you can figure it out today, by just asking yourself questions instead of listening to other people's answers. So it's challenging. Like, I'm not saying it's easy. It's definitely a really big challenge to cut away from that kind of stuff and tune into yourself. But look, if it's a yes, commit to it, commit to it wholeheartedly and keep moving through. And then don't worry about setting up these other things. I think a lot of people live on the fence in life. They're like, oh, I want to start that business, but I've got this. And it's like, I think the fence is the worst place to be. It's dangerous up there. You fall over either side and you break your leg. Like, you're better off being all in on one thing and all off on the other. And that would be my only recommendation. Like, whatever it is for you, do it and commit to it 100%. And you're going to be very successful if you do that.
That's awesome. It's definitely something that I'm probably guilty on the more micro level with decisions. Only lots of decisions, but very much like indecisiveness in terms of even travel. Like, I'll go, oh, I want to sort of travel somewhere, and then I start doubting and playing around with it. And I guess it's different, but also for me, I totally agree. Like, when you go commit something and you just go, I'm doing this, and you go and do it, and it's just so much better. And it's when you're half-hearted about just areas in life. Like, for me, even physio, something my shoulder I've had issues with for years, and it's like I finally committed and I was like, line in the sand, I'm going to go and do it. I'm going to go and commit to any exercises and things I have to do, and now I just get on with it and I just do it, and I don't have any issues with it because I'm just doing it. I'm committing to it. But when I'm like half-assed or whatever, that's when I have issues in life. So I think that's really powerful there. Cool. There's one thing you touched on in terms of Lachlan there. You mentioned that he, if I'm right, that he mentored you for free. And that's something that I'm interested in, because for me, it's an interesting dynamic. And I think you've talked about it in terms of energy going where money flows. And there might be different dynamics that play out here. But for now, it's something I debate and in terms of with people that I work with, because obviously your time, my time, everyone's time is a finite resource, energy is a finite resource. So it's like from there, money is almost in a way a filter, but then obviously not everyone's got equal access to money, and $5,000 to someone might be 500 quid to someone else. So I guess what I'm really trying to get at here is how much impact do you think money has on that energy flowing, and why do you think it worked for yourself and your brother if Lachlan did this for free? Was there some other sort of buy-in there that maybe was stronger than money?
Yeah, good question. Look, in most cases, money is a great transaction, right? Because it increases the energy of the scenario. I guess the interesting thing around Lachlan, he was 50 years old. He was a very wealthy individual, very empowered with his career. So he owned a bunch of businesses and he worked very, very high up in a corporation. So he was kind of on both sides. Very spiritually empowered guy, very healthy, very, very intelligent. So, for me and my brother, we were looking up to him and saying like, wow, this guy has a lot of the things that we want in life. He's wealthy, healthy, and has great relationships in his life. So we really respected that. And I think the transaction for him was that his time was exponentially more valuable than our time at that moment. And in the multiple of hundreds more valuable. And we knew that. And we always respected that, and we owned the way that we showed up with him because we really wanted to honor that. So there was actually a transaction, an energetic transaction there. It wasn't money in that context, but it had just such a big impact, you know. And I can't talk for other people that he's mentored, you know, throughout that time. But yeah, I guess coming from where I came from, I was just so committed. And the way that he presented the content was just like, you know, I learned more in one conversation with Lachlan than I did in my whole university degree. Like it was pretty crazy. He's a really smart guy. And that for me was the transaction. You know, he was passing the torch on to me. And also, secondly to this, I now dedicate my life to passing the torch that he passed to me to as many people as possible throughout my whole life. That's the debt that I owe. And I pay that debt every day. That's my life's mission, you know? So there was definitely a transaction. You could even consider it more of like a spiritual transaction. And I think, I don't know what Lachlan's intention is, but if I was to look into it and ask him the question, you know, that may be along the alignment is it's perhaps something more spiritual to him than it was about business.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because I don't know if I'm going to word this the right way, but I almost feel like sometimes money can, I don't know if taint's the right word, but sometimes taint things in terms of, I mean, again, I don't know Lachlan, I don't know what is there, but it's almost like as soon as you attach money to something, then it becomes potentially like a chore, or there's some expectations or things like that. Whereas I guess an example for me here is, say, an artist who does it out of passion, then suddenly has to decide, okay, they want to do it professionally, and then they start doing it for money, and then it's almost like that kind of chore. So I don't know if there's maybe a dynamic there, and I kind of forgot where I was going with this, but yeah, it's interesting. And I think from my point of view, just for people listening, I guess, just in general, I guess it's there. You said sort of respecting the time of other people. I think that's the biggest thing. The messages sometimes I see where it's like something you could potentially just sort of Google. And it's like, if you really want to build those relationships and get respect from people, at least in my view, it's respecting their time and their preference and having that sort of what's in it for them, for the mindset as well. And I think I was sort of thinking about something to do with just gratitude in general last night. And I was looking at, well, what am I really grateful for? And for me, it was my gran. And I looked into why, and it's like, because my gran's got this really just love for me, this like, because I believe that means so much to her. And it's like, well, why? And it's like there's nothing, there's no money or anything to do with, and I just know she should do anything. And it's like this, almost like for me to then reciprocate that and to honor that. And so for me, it's like thinking about, okay, what do I want to do? And it's like from there, potentially, okay, how can I help other people potentially like my gran who maybe don't have those families around, especially these kind of times now. And it's like this potential, this project, this path that I potentially want to go down now. And so I find that really interesting. And not really sure where I'm going with this, but yeah, interesting. And
I know what you mean. It's like a bit of a paradox in a way. You know, something I've come to learn in my life is that all breakthroughs in knowledge, perceived paradoxes, like that's where the real goal of life is, in my opinion. What I've come to learn personally is like my life is just a series of paradoxes that I face, and then eventually they merge together, and I see like the hidden order in it. And those are like the biggest growth moments. You know, one of them I've mentioned, that my psychosis was this really painful thing that actually turned into the catalyst for me to become the person I am today. And I love that today. I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything. And I guess something about Lachlan, like he did do it for free. However, he had spent his career, he's a very wealthy man, you know, very wealthy individual. One of the wealthiest, probably the second wealthiest person I know personally. And the other one would be another one of my mentors. Now, my two greatest mentors in life are the two wealthiest people, which is interesting because they're also the two most intelligent people that I know. And they're also the two most spiritually empowered people that I know. So it's quite an interesting thing. I think how you do one thing in life is how you do everything. And I think with money, you know, money for me is just an exchange of value. It's just a transaction in that way. But if Lachlan hadn't spent his life acquiring those transactions and building that wealth, I may have not seen him as such an authority. And I may not have taken on board his lessons and principles as much as I did in that moment. Right. So the energy of the money is still there, definitely. It's definitely still there. And that's a lot about what he taught me. You know, his whole course was based around leverage and finance and money and a lot of other stuff as well, purpose and intention and a bunch of that stuff. But it was very present there. So yeah, I'd say there's a bit of gold in there somewhere. I'm not sure where it is exactly, but yeah, there's definitely some gold in that paradox, I would say.
No, that's cool. And look, I want to shift it a bit to a bit more of like interesting around business focus now. And so a lot of the theme I try and go down is the more the behind the scenes of entrepreneurship, I should say. So not just the highs in the roller coaster, but also maybe the lows and a bit of that dynamic there. And so I guess for me, like a lot of the stuff pretty glamorized and they kind of cover the high level and they get that pump in energy. And then you realize you've got to do a tax return and it's not so fun, right? It's different dynamics there. So I think my question for you is, what are a couple of things that they don't tell you when to start in a business or during a business that you may want to share with people? And then how did you, not necessarily from a negative point of view, but what have you learned from those maybe that you would like to, that's actually actionable for other people?
Sure. I've got one that may trigger some people, but it's the truth. Life doesn't get any better. It just transforms. I think there's an addiction in certain circles, especially the personal development circle, is that when I do this, when I have that thing, when I be this way, my life will be better. And it's a myth, because in my view, life doesn't get better. It just transforms. And one of the things that I've learned in my life is it's no better to run a 7-figure business, which I've been very blessed to do twice in my life, than it is to run a business doing $10,000 a month. It's no better. The challenges, the risks, and the rewards are conserved. So they're like equal. And Buckminster Fuller, who is a great thinker, one of my favorite thinkers throughout history, said that nothing can ever be created or destroyed. It's just changing form. And I found that to be true in business. And funnily enough, I used to set these goals and I used to set them from the perspective of, oh, when I get here, when I run a 6-figure business, everything's going to be perfect in my life. And, I'm going to sit down and, smoke a cigar and everything's going to be great. Same thing, 7-figure business. Oh, when I build a 7-figure business, all my problems are going to go away and I'm going to be healthy, wealthy, happy. I'm going to have all this stuff. The reality is that when I built a 6-figure business, there were challenges that arose that I wasn't aware that I would face. And that became the journey of overcoming those. When I built a 7-figure business, I had way bigger challenges that I faced and I'm in the midst of facing right now. And that becomes the journey, right? It's a journey of constant risk, reward, challenge, problems, and that's all conserved. And the more that I view it in that way, the more empowered I become as a business owner, because I'm not living through a fantasy. A lot of people have fantasies in business. Oh yeah, when I get here, I'm going to buy this yacht and go and retire and blah, blah, blah. I don't think that happens. You rise to the challenge, you meet the new challenge, and that's life. And I wouldn't have it any other way. If it was the other way, we'd be living a one-sided life and we wouldn't grow as human beings. So there'd be no purpose to it.
I think that's more and more what I'm sort of realizing, at least going through. But I was going to kind of ask you there, okay, playing the devil advocate, well, why then? Why strive for more? But I think you kind of answered that. I think you touched on it as well in terms of the leverage you're talking about. And for me as well, it's that growth as a person. It's I think it's Tim Ferriss in 4-Hour Workweek who talks about 2 areas of fulfillment is learning and serving others. And I think by growing, you ultimately are going through those 2 things. So at least that's my understanding of why you keep growing the business. Is there anything else there as well?
Yes. So as you grow the business, you're going to become more empowered. But there's an interesting thing about empowerment. Empowerment has a cost. One of my favorite quotes is from a psychiatrist called Carl Jung, fascinating genius character. He said there's a sacrificial blood that binds the poles. And I love that quote because it's talking exactly what we're talking about. There's a sacrificial blood that binds the poles. You want to grow your business? What are you throwing on the fire? What are you sacrificing to go to that next level? Because you're not going to get there by pretending that you can put nothing in. There's no inputs. Business is a game of inputs and outputs, right? You've got to input to gain outputs. You can leverage things, but there's also a cost of leverage. So for me, what's the difference between running a 7-figure business and running a 6-figure business? Well, if I run a 7-figure business, my audience is bigger. When my audience is bigger, I can now pass the torch to more people. So I can expand my purpose. And I guess this is the key thing is if you get really focused on your vision and your why, you'll notice that your why expands geometrically throughout your life. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote a really beautiful essay on this called Circles. And he said, our life is a series of concentric circles expanding outwards. It's like our consciousness is expanding outwards in these concentric circles. And I've seen that to be true in business. So, the game gets bigger, the rewards get bigger, the freedom gets bigger, but the discipline maybe gets greater. The challenges gets greater, the conversations get more tricky, all of that stuff. So the work that I'm really doing at the moment is learning to love the challenge, learning to love the game of business. And the more that I do that, the faster I rise, because I'm not sitting in that pain and suffering of, oh, this staff member just left. Oh God, what am I going to do? It's like, you got to love that. You really got to learn to love it. And that becomes your degree of mastery, is your ability to love the shit with the good, is your ability to rise in business and do so quickly.
Yeah, that's awesome. I want to touch on okay, well, that sounds great, but how do you go and do that? Because I feel like it's something that I'm pretty good at. Recently I had I recently had an Amazon account suspended last month. Recently I had 4 teeth pulled out, and the dentist was like, why are you so calm about this? And it's like, well, it's just these general external factors. It's things that I think the biggest thing for me is knowing that it's not forever. I think the areas I find really difficult are for example, a random illness. When I feel really, really sick and I don't know why, because I don't know how long this is going to go on for. I don't know how it's going to end. With a lot of challenges, really, if it's a staff member leaving or it's a suspension, I'm just putting into perspective. At least that's for me, put things into perspective. And I'm what are the impacts on other areas and how's it going to impact me in the long run? And maybe it comes back to those horizons. But yeah, I want to get your thoughts. How do you actually put that into practice? How can someone who's maybe facing something that feels like it's the end of the world, maybe put that into context a bit, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, for sure. Look, the most transformational moment of my life was actually in a conversation with Lachlan. And Lachlan said to me, Ben, what's the worst thing that's ever happened to you? And I proceeded to recount this specific episode of psychosis that I had. It was in order of magnitude, probably 100 times worse than the other ones. It was very, very deep and dark and painful. You'd imagine all the fear for your whole life condensed into just one moment. There's a lot of pressure in that one moment. So I was recounting and telling him the story of everything that happened. And I'd done this to a few people. I'd done this to a psychiatrist. I'd done this to my parents. I'd done this to my brother. I'd done this to a few close friends. And Lachlan had a very interesting response, because a lot of people, when I told them that story, they'd cry or they would just kind of want to run out of the room, or they didn't have the capacity to kind of sit with it. Whereas Lachlan didn't change his tone at all, didn't respond. He waited until I finished and he said, Ben, and how's that been of benefit to you? And my jaw kind of dropped for a second, because I was like, benefit? What the hell's going on? No one had ever asked me a question like that before. And he just kept pushing. Said, no, let's think of the benefits. And first thing I said is, there's no benefits. And he said, I think there are. Let's keep looking. And he just kept asking me the question. And all of a sudden I clicked. I had a moment. And I said, well, look, I am very, very anxious at the moment, but there's one thing that makes my anxiety go away: training my body, getting in the gym. Lachlan, I'm in the gym for sometimes 5 hours in one day right now. And you know what? I'm actually the healthiest I've ever been in my life. I'm about 5% body fat right now. I was incredibly healthy because I was just training the house down, going nuts. And he's like, interesting. What else? And I said, well, socially, I've actually cut away from a large group of friends that were out partying and taking drugs every day. And I've actually really just pulled that circle into my brother, a couple of close friends that are really supporting me through this time. And I feel good about that. I feel more empowered. I said, interesting. What else? I said, well, now that I think about it, my mom and my brother have helped me and extended themselves in just crazy way that I would never have expected. And I feel so loved and supported from my family right now. They're going above and beyond right now. He's like, okay, cool. What else? I said, you know what? I've got more money than I've ever had in my whole life right now. I've started saving money because I'm not spending my money on drugs. I feel amazing about that. He goes, okay, cool. Next one. I've moved out of a career that I didn't like. I was doing landscape laboring, and I'd moved into a job that I started to like. I was actually working in a bottle shop, and I was really enjoying the conversations with people, and it was easier and different, and it was great. So, okay, what else? And I go, well, Lachlan, I'm being mentored by you, and I feel like I'm learning more than I've ever learned in my life. And he goes, interesting. And do you feel like you'd be having and being and doing all this stuff if you didn't have that event? And I said, no. Now at that moment, never forget this, for my whole life, I had tears rolling down my face. I can't think of that moment today without tears coming into my eyes. And I sit there and I go, power of one question completely change a person's life. That was the moment where I threw away my medication. That was the moment I healed, because I realized that the worst thing that ever happened to me was the best. And I just didn't have the eyes to see it. So what that taught me is, no matter what you've gone through in your life, no matter the pain, no matter the trauma, no matter the suffering, no matter the darkness, there is always light. There is always benefits, always. And I found that to be true consistently. And I've run other people through this process, and it's tricky to do that. It takes courage, both from the mentor, it takes courage, and from the student, it takes courage. And not everyone is prepared to do that. But, that's my ultimate truth today, is that no matter what you've gone through in your life, you can get through it. And it's conserved. It's in the moment. It's right now. If you're having a problem with your client, or you're having a problem with your staff member or your partner or your brother or your sister or your mother, your father, or the world at large, or the government, a lot of people are pissed off at the government right now because there's stuff with COVID. I would ask, what are the benefits? And that's been my practice. And I do that every single day. And yeah, that's where it comes from.
Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing. I think that's really powerful. I appreciate that. And yeah, a little bit lost for words. I don't think I really can add anything to that. I think that's amazing. And so almost reluctantly, I want to kind of move on a bit into maybe a similar topic, because I don't want this to all be about business. I think that's wonderful for me, is almost maybe too much focus on business. And I'm curious, how have you found finding a balance, or is that important to you, a balance between business and then other areas of life? And how have you done that? Maybe talking to me, knowing what you do about me, how can I maybe get a bit more of a feeling for balance, or maybe should I be bothered about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's incredibly, incredibly important. It's going to take this back to, to kind of build on what I was just saying. It was a few years later. It was probably about 3 years after that moment with Lachlan. I kind of looked back, and my brother and I had built a business. We'd scaled that business to $80,000 per month. So to go from that point to build a 7-figure business, I remember I sat down and I said, how? Like what kind of went on? What happened? And I remember I was in a seminar and I was hosting the seminar, and someone asked me a very similar question. And I walked up to the board and I I was studying sacred geometry at the time. And I was very, very interested, because Lachlan opened my eyes to this underlying harmony in the universe. And he gave me a experiential moment of that. It wasn't intellectual. I dropped into this experience of, there's a harmony in my suffering. So for me, my life today is really dedicated to finding that harmony. I want to mathematically prove it. I want to measure it. I want to show people that harmony. And sacred geometry has been a really, really big study of mine, because sacred geometry is really the study of these universal laws of harmony and how they're showing themselves in nature. So I went down this rabbit hole, and I remember I drew this. There's this one specific shape in sacred geometry, which is the shape of the octave. It's essentially 7 interlocking circles. You've probably seen it. If you've ever been to Bali, it's kind of everywhere. It's often in these places. And I drew it up on the board, and I said, health, social, family, finance, career, intellect, intimacy. And I drew those in the 7 circles. And I said to the person, what do you score yourself in these areas? And I went through, and I realized that I'd actually drawn up and I'd linked the octave with the things that Lachlan helped me to shift in that moment, that breakthrough that I had. And I remember I kind of sat down and I was staring at the picture for ages. I was just staring at it and staring at it. I was like, wow, okay. And I just kept going back to this. So I kind of cut away from all my work for about a week. And I just went into crazy study mode. And I try to break the system. So I talked to a bunch of people, like I showed them the thing, and I'm like, hey, do you think there's any other areas than this? Health, social, family, finance, career, intellect, and intimacy. And not one person that I've spoken to since that day can tell me an area that lives kind of outside of those key functions. So for me, I actually built a system on the back of this. I call it the Seed of Life. And what I do today, every single month, I score myself out of 10 in those areas. So I say, okay, where am I? And I actually notice that there's fluctuation. And interestingly, there's actually a masculine and a feminine side. This is what I came to discover later on, is the Seed of Life is a derivation of the Taoist system of yin and yang. Like they always talk about yin and yang. And there are yin areas of life, which are all about experiencing values today, health, social, family. They're all about what I call eating the fruit of life. And then you've got the planting trees side of life, which is all about pushing out your values into tomorrow. You've got finance, career, and intellect. So you can almost imagine them like coming up through the body. This is like an interesting exercise. So you imagine that you've got health, which is your base, kind of like around your sexual organs. Like that's kind of like health is your base, right at the where your feet kind of meets your torso. Then you move up to your stomach, which is like social. And you move up to your solar plexus, which is family. You move up to finance, which is at the heart, which is an interesting one. You move up to career, which is at the throat. And you move up to intellect, which is right between the eyes. And you move up beyond your head, and you have what I would consider to be intimacy, is the shell that kind of confines us. And what I've come to learn is that greatest quest in life is growing in all 7 of these areas. You see, because what I used to do is dedicate my life to trying to grow in like one area at a time, and everything else would fall away and I'd be miserable. No, yeah, okay, I was doing really well in business. My health was slacking. My social was shit. My family was bad. My finance was okay. And I wasn't reading or learning, and I was growing in business. But what I thought was, okay, what if I run a broad agenda here? What if I set goals in each of those areas every single month? So set an intellect goal, set a finance goal, set a business goal, set a health goal, set a social goal, set a family goal. And what I noticed was my life improved exponentially. I became more empowered. I became more certain. I became more present. And all the things that I was searching for became much easier. I dropped into flow state, and it was easier to grow my business. I could grow my business in less time. And like here's an analogy that I think is really, really helpful for this. I want you to imagine that you own a property and you live on that property, and it's a huge property. There's acreage or just miles and miles of acreage all around. And there's a house in the middle, and you're inside that house. Now, there's only 2 actions that you can take in your day. Action number 1 is you can walk outside and plant a tree. And action number 2 is you can sit down with your friends and family, and you can eat the fruit of that tree. One of the biggest mistakes of entrepreneurship, and one thing that I did personally for a very long time when I first started out, was I'm very good at planting trees. So I go out, plant. And the thing is, every single day, it would take me longer to get from where I was, the house, to the edge of the boundary where I was planting the trees. And I would just plant further and further and further. So it took me longer to get there every day, longer to get home. And what I realized, I turned around at a point in my life and I said, shit, all I see are trees, but there is no one here to eat the fruit with me. And I dropped into quite a deep feeling of loneliness, a deep feeling of depression. So what I started to do was I started to ask myself this question: how can I spend half my day planting trees and half my day eating fruit? And I started to buffer my day with these activities, and I started to define those activities. So one fruit activity for me was doing yoga. Now that was definitely eating the fruit. It was like indulging. Another one might be going to get a massage or going to the physio. Another one might be going out for a drink with a friend. Another one might be having a beautiful dinner, eating the best foods you can possibly find and afford. Another one might be just going shopping, going to buy some clothes. Another one might be buying a nice pen, journaling, anything about where you're sitting into, and just enjoying the luxury of life. And I think as business owners and entrepreneurs and people that are on that path, they're typically addicted to planting trees and they've forgotten how to eat the fruit. And the opposite goes for people that aren't really interested in that. They're typically addicted to eating fruit, but they're not very good at planting trees. So eventually they run out of fruit and they get pissed off. So that's a very, very simple way of thinking about balance in life. And that's been my guiding principle, is how can I eat fruit, plant trees every single day, instead of doing it on these wide cycles. And you'll notice this as well. People go through cycles in life where they plant trees for like 10 years and they burn out and they get over it. And they're like, no, I'm moving to the Bahamas, and they're going to spend 5 years in the Bahamas doing nothing but eating fruit. And you're going to go through those cycles. So my thought is do that on a daily level instead of having to do it on these wild, volatile, long monthly or yearly or decade long cycles. I do it every day.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I guess for people who don't know, I share it quite a lot, but I've been working with yourself, and it's something that I've taken on board, and something that the more I'm doing, I find it so useful. Like really just been through goal setting exercises, and I have all my goals. I have the goal, why I'm doing it, potential roadblocks, action steps, and then I have like which pillar of life that's in, and then I'm go, even if it's a yearly goal, okay, what am I going to do this month towards that? And I have that on a daily level, and things like my shoulder, things like just health, going for blood tests, and relationship wise, just being proactive and actually intentional practice there. And I've noticed huge differences, like especially just my energy in general is something that changed massively. And look, there's still definitely a lot of work. I almost say that, especially with business, it's almost an addiction to me. I've always had like these games like RuneScape when I was younger, which is very much micro games, and then like poker and things like this, where really these clear lines of progression and almost this pull towards it. Like I remember when I was younger and my gran was looking after myself and my brother during summer holidays, and they'd be like going off into town to go and, I don't know, go and grab like some sweets or something and go and do things. And I was like, no, I want to play on my game and do that. And it's funny, when I was younger, I used to, I said to my mum and dad, I'm pretty sure I've told them this now, but if not, they'll get surprised when they listen to this. I said to them, always used to do on like a Friday, I'll make you coffee. What time do you want it in the morning on a Saturday? Because I wasn't allowed to play a lot. And I said to my dad, oh yeah, I'll make you the coffee. And then I knew they wouldn't come downstairs then. So that was my like kind of, okay, at 8 o'clock, I know that I'm going to go and make them coffee. So I've got from 6 till 8 to go and play on my game downstairs, and it's secret and it's interesting. But the point I'm kind of trying to get to is I still have this internal like reluctance, even though I know that when I go and do these things, when I go for a cycle, when I go and have a massage, when I go to physio, I get these really rewarding feelings, and it's still that internal reluctance that like someone's kind of fighting. But I feel like the more I do it, the more that's kind of dropping. And something I found really useful is actually something I learned from your book, is like a daily check-in system. So I don't know if you want to share a bit. I don't know if that's something that you still do. It's something I find really interesting on like a daily basis, just sort of, I'm using the type form now. Is that something that you still do? And do you want to talk a little bit about that? And does that help you?
Yeah, it's something I don't do it today because I kind of do it in my head today, but I did do it for about 5 years. Every single day, I actually built this little automated system where I would send myself an email and a text message at 8 p.m. every single day. And inside that email and text message was a form. And that form was like a daily deep dive. And it took me less than 5 minutes to do. And what I actually built was like a scoring system. So it was based on the seed of life. So I'd ask myself health questions, and I would reset the questions every month to be in alignment with my goals. So for example, if my goal was to do 25 yoga sessions in the month, or to read 10 books, I would ask myself questions in alignment with that on the daily level. So like, did you do yoga? Yes or no? And I could track my performance on a daily level. And I actually gave myself a seed of life score, because I added up these things and added a score to each question, depending on what I wanted to work on at that moment. And it was so helpful for me because it built this habit of every single day thinking about, how is my octave today? Now, here's a really helpful analogy to think about when it comes to the seed of life. You imagine that you're sitting down at a piano. There's 7 octaves of the piano. And when we're first learning to play the piano, you play Mary Had a Little Lamb, right? So there's 1 octave. Mary had a little lamb. Do, 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 do. That is what most people are doing in their life, is they are parading around with their chest puffed out like a penguin, telling everyone how good they are. Look at me, career, finance. And unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, it's just the way that it is. But, our society, Western society, has a higher perceived value on finance and career than the other areas of life. So they're typically the areas that people are playing Mary Had a Little Lamb with. But my question is, okay, what would happen if we learned how to play all 7 octaves of the piano, and we sat back and we allowed our life to become a harmony? We allowed our life to become a rhythm. Who knows how well we could play, right? Beethoven, all these artists, these true creative geniuses, it's all 7 octaves. They're not playing on 1 octave. That's baby stuff. So that instilled this habit in me every single day of checking in on those areas and asking myself questions in those areas for 5 years. And at the end of that 5 years, those questions remain. Those questions are there. They never stop for me. And any time that I feel myself out of alignment, which happens all the time, like, it's like this. So it's a roller coaster. So peaks and valleys in each area. Towards the end of last year, I really let my health slip. It wasn't doing great. But I can tell you in January of 2021, I had the best health month than I'd had in all of 2020. I lost a few kilos. I trained 20 something times. I fasted every single day. I ate really, really well. I ate 95% of the foods I ate were like really, really great and on point and on target. And now I'm in momentum. Now it's easy. Now I'm like, that's my normal, my habit is back, it's installed. But it wouldn't be there unless I got real with myself and said, Ben, what the hell's going on? And I scored myself, I think, a 2 out of 10 in health. And I go, oh dear, this is getting bad. I need to fix this. So, that's the game that I play. And it's a game I play with myself. It's constant. It's never ending for the rest of my life. I'm going to play it. I really enjoy it. I've learned to love that game.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's definitely something that when I sort of read that in your book, it was definitely something that reached out to, or appealed to me, and it's something I find really rewarding. So it just helps with that momentum and the discipline. Anything that can make those things easier, because it's so much going on. It's just bringing that back down to something that's really easy to implement. I think at least that's the way I see it. Cool. All right, I want to ask you, sort of to start to bring this towards a bit of a close, I want to ask you a question. It's, how do you want your success to be measured when you leave this world? Like, what would you like to be measured by to define your success?
I would love my success to be measured by the volume of the torch that I was able to pass to others. I just want to inspire other people to pass the torch. I think that's really the goal of my life. Is I feel like I've uncovered a set of principles, and those principles have helped me to go from the bottom of the barrel and a life of suffering to a life of meaning and freedom. And if that resonates with anyone, I would love to pass those principles on. And if it doesn't, that's cool too. I'm not here to serve everyone, but I'm just here to do my best to pass that message along. And I would do that no matter the circumstances. That's the thing that I'm most committed to doing. I don't care about the money. I don't really care about these things overall. Really, for me, the money is just a byproduct of that. So yeah, that's really how I will judge my success. And yeah, that's
cool.
me.
Thank you for sharing. And if people want to reach you, Ben, is there anywhere in particular that they can reach out to you?
Yeah, so we have a website. It's called systemsforbusiness.ai. And on that website, you can see a few of our offers and the things that we do. Look, really easy things to do. I have a book that you can access from the website. You can actually grab it. And I also have a journal that actually uses the Seed of Life process. It's more specifically towards business owners. We will be bringing out one that's more for everyone as a whole, just on the Seed of Life process at some point this year. So yeah, just tune into the website. We have a podcast. You can listen into that if you want more of these principles and you resonate with the message. So yeah, that's systemsforbusiness.ai. It's a little bit of a tricky one.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. I'll drop a link below, either if you're on YouTube, it'll be in the description, or podcast, it'll be in a little snippet, whatever that is there. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing. That was, I really appreciate it. Awesome.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Cheers.